This is a work in progress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the overall logic and the framework that we're developing in the context of what we're calling a policy roadmap for unlocking the power, returning to that particular concept or phrase that Ma introduced at the beginning in her presentation, for unlocking the power of mountain product value chains. So we're not focusing on mountain area territorial development specifically, but actually on utilizing how mountain product value chains can contribute to sustainable and resilient territorial development. And that's a very, very important point. Just briefly, why work with a roadmap? Well, roadmaps, firstly, are increasingly recognized as useful strategic tools. They offer a very flexible approach, and I think you'll see that we're exploiting that flexibility or attempting to exploit that flexibility. And they're particularly useful in the context of guiding and facilitating transformations which involve multiple policy domains. And that, of course, is very, very relevant to mountain area development. We've already heard specifically mention of the CAP, we've heard specific mention of cohesion policy, and of course, that's been discussed within the context of a long-term vision for rural areas. Also, we find that the roadmap is a very useful, it's a very strong metaphor for engaging local actors and stakeholders. It's this question of where do we want to go, how do we want to get there, and when. It offers a very dynamic sort of framework, and also it's very suitable for realizing visions and strategic options, such as those developed through participatory foresight exercises. And here I'm alluding, obviously, to the previous presentation. Here's part of our vision. It's a very beautiful valley in the south of Switzerland towards the Italian border. Had a great fortune of being there last week. And we had a very, very interesting discussion. And we came to a very, very clear conclusion. We had 20 or 30 other stakeholders there, mountain stakeholders, is that actually, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is this desperately important need for an institutional transformation to sustain the ecological and socioeconomic systems of our mountains, and particularly at a regional level. Now, that's a conclusion which has been reached by a range of other scholars. This is a nice quote, actually, which is over 20 years old now. But the foundation for a sustainable future is a continuation of ecological processes and functions across landscapes dominated by human activity. And that's highly relevant to placing mountain value chains into an appropriate context with respect to mountain area development. So basically, our working hypothesis is that mountain product value chains, notably those that we have focused on, which have been food, drink, and rural tourism value chains, have a potential both to help achieve a balance between ecosystem service delivery and socioeconomic development in mountain areas, whilst maintaining and enhancing the capacity of mountain communities to withstand and adapt to these multiple drivers of change. Question is how to unlock and further enhance this potential. Back to that phrase, unlocking the power. Now, as Ma has indicated, there's a lot of work taken place inside of the Moving Project over the past 4 years. What we're attempting to do is to systematically bring the results and findings of that work together in order to inform and feed into this concept of a policy roadmap. Now, some colleagues here may be surprised to see this particular diagram. It was in part of Ma's presentation, and it's this conceptual framework that we've been working with. And this actually is a very, very important conceptual framework that's also relevant to our work on policies. And essentially, this conceptualizes mountain value chains in the context of so-called socio-ecological systems, those places where ecology and society and humans come together in ideally a harmonious and mutually supportive relationship. So this framework gives us a clear understanding that there is this very important interaction between both natural assets and human assets in order to generate goods and services. These services have values. those values actually generate very specific outcomes. Some of those are explicitly economic, and we do tend to focus very much upon those. But there are others which are less explicit and which are much more about the environmental and social benefits. So this is a conceptualization. And depending upon the outcomes of the balance between the economic and the non-economic, then we either move towards or away from more sustainable and resilient mountain areas. Now, what's really interesting actually about this conceptual framework is that it places governance inside of that system. And then those governance systems within the socio-ecological system are then connected to external policy frameworks. And it's through those frameworks and the variety of those different frameworks that we can influence the governance of these local socio-ecological systems, that we can influence the balance between social and ecological outcomes. So we advocate very much that we need to be embedding much more strongly these mountain socio-ecological systems into our understanding of the different scales of territorial governance that we are dealing with and the associated policy actions. And to use these different scales and actions in order to build a more favorable framework at a local level for empowering, for enabling the use, the contribution of mountain value chains to sustainable and resilient territorial development. And central to that, absolutely central to that, is the strengthening of our local governance and institutions at the level of these systems, at the level of the local and regional socio-ecological systems. This is a conclusion which has also been reached by other academics. This is a reference here, which is particularly interesting, drawn from a global survey of mountain area governance. Strong local governance can make constructive differences in the well-being of local residents. Very interesting paper. So the objective of our policy roadmap, and I see I've got at least 8 minutes. I've got a maximum of 8 minutes remaining, so I'm halfway through the presentation. I'll try and give it a little bit shorter, Carla. The objective of our roadmap is firstly, and we see this as fundamentally important, and again, it relates also to the point that Ma said about changing narrative, is that we see the roadmap, we need to construct and communicate a more compelling narrative for more targeted and integrated support via stronger local governance of mountain product value chains as agents of positive change. Through the roadmap, we hope to aim to illustrate that by providing a practical operational guidance on the opportunities for short to medium term use for currently available policy instruments in order to create adaptable and flexible policy interventions to improve the contribution of mountain product value chains to territorial development. And also, through the roadmap, we will also have observations on and deliver relevant recommendations for longer term improvements in future policies. Now, a key target for our roadmap is the mountain lobby, because I'm sorry to tell you, but politicians come and they go. Policies come and they go. But the individuals and organizations who have a vested interest in mountain area development, they continue to stay in place and they continue to put pressure upon relevant policymakers and decision makers at all levels over extended periods of time. And I was very struck by this point from Balash earlier, that it's time to get engaged. It's time for a mountain lobby to get engaged. So that's part of our target group. So in terms of basic architecture of our roadmap, because there is an architecture, there is a structure, we're working with this concept of policy building blocks. Now, policy building blocks are a very convenient way of representing and structuring clusters of policy interventions, processes, working methods, etc., which can make a meaningful, which can work towards delivering more coherent policies for specific objectives. The use of building blocks is very well established. It manifests itself currently, for example, through elements of the long-term vision for rural areas. And we basically have identified and proposed 7 building blocks blocks of enabling factors to enhance the contribution of mountain product value chains to sustainable mountain territorial development. The overall framework, as I've already implied, is definitely substantial improvements in governance and regulation of our mountain areas and the specific elements associated with product value chains. But then there are six additional building blocks that relate to specific challenges which we have observed, specific opportunities that we have observed, specific needs that we have observed in order to strengthen our mountain product value chains. And that's to strengthen their contribution into that. These blocks relate to growing skills, knowledge, and innovation, to fostering collaboration and networking, to better balancing ecology and society. And there's some interesting opportunities, some interesting mechanisms, frameworks for doing this. Very importantly, preparing and adapting for change, sustaining the use of local assets, and then ensuring mountain livelihoods. Much more of an economic focus there compared to the others. Now, very importantly also, when we come to working with these building blocks, it immediately gives us this opportunity for a first level of policy mixing. And again, this again is very important in the context, not only of the strategic programming of specific policy lines, specific policy budgets, but also the mixing of different policy domains. And of course, we have these different types of potential interaction, we have complementarities, we have synergies, and also, of course, we need to look out for counterproductivity. What we can also do is that, of course, we can then begin to assemble our policy building blocks in different ways to respond to specific needs associated with specific challenges or opportunities. This can be articulated in various ways through programs, schemes, measures, strategies, etc., depending upon the level of governance. And for example, through the foresight work, we see three what we call transitional or transformation pathways based upon what Dominic presented previously. And these pathways are very different. Pathways that at a local level that may focus on sustainable and resilient growth, that may focus on diversification and innovation, or as Dominic highlighted, may focus upon the preservation of environmental and cultural services. And they will have different needs, and they will involve different combinations and mixes of policy interventions. And that's what we want to illustrate through the roadmap. So very, very quickly, because I see 2.5 minutes still on my clock. In terms of constructing and elaborating the building blocks, we're building them up with a general aim. Firstly, for example, relating to fostering collaboration and networking, building informal and formal relationships within and between product value chains for various purposes. Could be co-creation, could be innovation through co-creation. It could be increasing agency and influence, again, referring to Dominic's recommendation. Also then developing specific objectives. So for example, under this fostering collaboration and networking, we could focus on promotion of learning and exchange through cooperation, the encouragement of horizontal and vertical cooperation within and between value chains to improve market access, for example, supporting the setting up of producer cooperatives, or establishing partnerships and projects for innovations in products and processes. Obviously, there's a range of potential interventions. We'd also very much like to illustrate, as I've indicated, the potential use of existing currently available policy instruments available from various sources. So, for example, if we just look into the EAFRD, if we just look into the CAP strategic plans regarding cooperation, collaboration, we come immediately to Article 70 and the great flexibility that the co-op measures offer. We're very much aiming to integrate the foresight strategic options which emerge from Dominic's work and of course other inspirational examples of policy implementation to illustrate the potential for policy mixing. Also, very importantly, to highlight the contribution to the long-term vision, including the identification of relevant indicators, nodding there very much towards the presentation from Sylvia and the recent communication, and also observations on the need for better programming and implementation. And in that respect, I come to my final slide, because also we're working with some ideas regarding the intervention logic and the need for maybe adapting and modifying our approach to intervention logics and building it around the concept of the building blocks. So, for example, we see here a very preliminary flow focusing on, oops, I've gone over 15 minutes, I'm sorry about that, assess from the assessment of challenges, needs and motivations through targeted capacity building, fundamentally important. I keep using that word fundamentally important, that phrase, but I'm sorry about that. Through the selection of relevant policy building blocks, focusing on realistic and actionable leverage points. This is something very specific that we could talk in more detail about, and also constructing effective policy mixes and linking it all to the monitoring of impact. Thank you very much for your attention.